Okay, this is another screencast talking about how to use lists as menus, but this time we'll do a horizontal menu. What you see on the screen is a previous screencast showing lists, but as a vertical menu. So starting with that, I'll just get rid of some of the code that we've got. So, oops. So I'm going to leave the actual HTML exactly the same as it was before. So if you've not seen this previous screencast, that's a wrapper tag, a div with a wrapper class around the entire thing, just so we can indent the entire content, a banner with a heading 1, and then a UL with a class menu attached to it, and then a div called class content, which contains various paragraphs, with another list. The idea of having two lists is I can make sure that anything I do that's meant to alter this menu list doesn't also alter this ordinary list that's not a menu. And again, this is the HTML I started with, so I'll leave some of it and get rid of some of it. In fact, I'm going to get rid of all of the stuff that's to do with our menu and we'll start again. So I'm just leaving the wrapper there. If you remember, that's that outside div. Let me just save that. That's the outside div that encloses everything. If we look at the web page and I refresh that page, this is what we've got. So that's our wrapper around the entire thing, and I've styled it just to bring it in on both sides a little bit and center it. But this is as is a list. This is the content area. So let's start off. So first of all, let's get rid of the dots on the menu. So in our list menu, what we're dealing with is a UL with the class menu attached to it. And this is my definition to do with that. As a matter of fact, probably I could do without the UL part and just simply say the thing that's called a menu. If I were to do that, then if elsewhere in my HTML I had something else with the class menu attached to it, it would affect that as well. If I put UL with a menu attached, then this definition only affects ULs with menus attached. So this is the way I did it in the previous screencast. I think I'll try it that way in this screencast just to show that it kind of still works. But there's a difference. This is a more general definition. Okay, so what we want to do is suggest that list style type is none. In other words, what we're going to try and do when I save that is remove the dots from this, but without moving the dots from this. So I press Ctrl R and that worked. Okay, so I've removed the dots from the side of that. It's indented slightly, and in the last screencast we found that if I alter padding on the menu class and set it to 0, then it's altering the padding on the UL, and that comes in. In actual fact, there's a bit of a spacer here at the top, but that isn't padding, it's margin. So if I were to set margin of my menu to 0, then when I refresh, we'll find this will move up fractionally because the padding will have disappeared. Actually, I said that and it didn't happen. But that's just to do with the collapsing of adjacent margins. On the previous vertical one, you would have noticed that would have moved to the top. It's quite a complicated subject, this collapsing of adjacent margins. If we've got a margin there and a margin here, they often collapse into one, and so you make a change and it doesn't appear to make any difference. So I am going to leave that as is. Okay, what else do we want to do? Well, I want this to be horizontal, and by default LIs are block items within the UL, and so each block item is on its own line. So there's two things I could do. I could say, okay, if you are a menu class inside which you're an LI, in other words, that's what we've got here. Let's remind ourselves, this is the menu class attached to the UL, and inside that menu class, they're LIs. That's why the definition is the way it is. It's menu space LI, meaning LIs inside the menu class. Then there's two ways I could do it. I could say display inline, and that will make them appear side by side. Alternatively, I could make them float. If I make them float, that also has the effect of putting them side by side with each other. And there might be a certain advantage to that. The advantage is that I can probably deal with padding and margin And you know, I'm not sure if margin exists on an inline item. So actually, let's find out. So I'm going to say margin right. Let's make it, let me think, how about 0.5%? So I'll save that. And the reason I've done margin right is because I don't want the margin on the left of that to be altered. I just want it to be the right of that one, then the right of that one, the right of that one, and the right of that one you won't notice, but it will have the effect of pushing these along. So did I save that? Yes, I did. If I refresh, does that work? Yes, it did. Look, it pushed them a little tiny bit away from each other. There's probably another reason why displaying lines not such a good way to do it. I'm going to increase that margin and maybe this will demonstrate it. I'll just save that and reload it, and then I'm going to take a small sidetrack and I'm going to style the list items, the A's. So in other words, an A inside an LI when that's inside a menu. I'm going to change the background colour when we hover over it. So menu, inside that when you're an LI, and inside that when you're an A. Let's do a general definition first. Let's take away the text and decoration and say it's none. So what that will do is take away the underlines on those menus. And then let's do an even more specific definition where we're saying if you're a menu, inside which you're an LI, inside which you're an A, but you're an A in one of those pseudo states, and this particular pseudo state is called hover. If you remember, there's A : hover, A : visited, A : active. There might be another one, but I can't bring that to mind. So hover, I'm going to change the background colour to like a mid-grey, CCC. Save that, hit enter, and let's see what happens. So a bit similar to what happened on the previous screencast. Notice the grey is only around the words. It's not sort of occupying the entire block. Well, because they're not block elements, we've specifically made them inline elements, these LIs. So maybe what I need to do is to make them block elements instead and go back to my thought. Then rather than changing the display type to inline, what I'm going to do is make them float, and I'll make them float to the left instead. Okay, I'll do that. Now this will have an odd effect. Because they float to the left, they'll all sit next to each other, but I've got a feeling that this will come up by the side because that's what floats do. They move to one side and allow other content to come by the side of them. So in this context, what we'll need to do is to tell this div, which is content, that it needs to have a clear view of, you can either say clear : left, so it has to move down until it can see the left margin, or you can say clear : right, so it has to move down to see the right margin when it actually can already see the right margin, or you can say clear both, in which case it will move down until it can see both the left and the right margin. So on this particular example, the content, we're going to want to make it clear, and I could get away with left, but I think I might write both just because, actually no, I won't, I'll write left because that's actually all I need at the moment. So when I press refresh, that will have to move down until it can have a clear view of the right margin, which is the left margin, sorry. Move down until it can see the left margin, clear left. So that stopped that from happening. Right, I'm going to give these a set width, so even the words that are longer will have the same width as the words that are shorter. So in other words, my LI, I'm going to give it a width, each individual one, of, let's try 100 pixels. Now again, I'm using a pixel measurement because I want them all, I don't want them to expand and shrink as I change the window, which is what would happen if I used a %. But because they're floating, they'll still sort of move around to accommodate any change in screen size. So I'll press Ctrl+R and we'll see how we get on. So that doesn't seem too bad, does it? Except, as I say, I've got this problem that my background is only as wide as the text, and it's only as wide as the text because an A is an inline element, and an inline element, its width is only as wide as the text div is. If I made that A into a block element instead, then all blocks by default are 100% width of their parent. They're as wide as their parent. So let's change that to display block. And what that will do is A will be a block, so it will be as wide as its parent, which is its parent, the li, so it will be 100 pixels wide. So when I refresh the page, it doesn't appear to change, except that when I scroll over it, look, suddenly the background expands to fill everything. It would be quite nice if I could maybe center this text within that. Maybe that's an option, or maybe I could increase the padding on the left hand side to move that over fractionally so that they're all indented the same amount. I wonder which I prefer. Let's try text align first of all and see what effect that has. And we have to spell it in the American spelling rather than English spelling. So refresh the page, and that's centered each one. Okay, so that's not bad, other than the fact that it's moved it over on that one there. It doesn't line up with that anymore. Not sure that matters to me at the moment. I think also what I might do is put borders around these. Now I wonder whether to put a border around the UL so that the whole thing has a border around it, or put borders around the LIs. I think I'll try both. So let's try menu, and I'm going to put border thin solid, and I'm going to use that same grey so it's not a big standout border. Save that, refresh. So now isn't that weird, look, because I put a border around the UL. How come that UL border doesn't enclose these things that are inside it? Well, that's slightly tricky to explain, and as a matter of fact I've got a file somewhere where I can explain it. This page sort of explains it. I've got a div, like a wrapper, and inside that div I've got one paragraph, and I've also got this float. And what happens with a float is that stuff moves to one side, but in actual fact this outer wrapper doesn't realise that the float kind of hangs outside it. The way I always think of it is like a curtain. Imagine this is a window, and a curtain hangs in front of the window, but it's quite happy to hang beneath the window, if that makes sense. So this div is inside, this div here floats, and it's inside this wrapper div, which doesn't float, and the wrapper div only knows how high it is because of this ordinary paragraph that's not floating. If this ordinary paragraph weren't here, this would actually have zero height, and that's what's happening here. Because this menu, its only content is floating, it doesn't realise that it has any height, so it makes itself zero height. And there's a really easy way around that, which is you simply, in the container that contains these floating things, you just say overflow auto, and that seems to make the parent container realise that it has some content, and the border suddenly expands to enclose what is otherwise the floating content. Okay, so that worked really quite well, didn't it? So it's giving me this nice border around things. If I were now to give the LIs a border only on their right hand side, it would act almost like a vertical divider there, because there'd be one border on the right of this one border on the right of that one on the right of that, one on the right of that. So that's what I'm going to do next. Menu LI border right thin solid, and I'll give it the same colour, CCC. So save that, refresh, and that's giving me those vertical dividers. Small gap there. Why have I got a small gap there? Why have I got a small gap there? It's the margin or padding, isn't it? Did I put some margin or padding? Yes, I put margin right of that amount. And if you remember, margin is outside the border. So if I were to maybe change that from margin to padding, that would be inside the border, and I've got a feeling that that'll make a difference. No, it then puts it on the outside. Okay, I think what I might do is just leave that as a problem for you to solve. How about if I simply don't do any padding, because now that I'm aligning them text align center, maybe I don't need that, so I'll try removing it and see how I get on. Okay, so that sort of solves that problem. If I want these to be a bit wider, then I can just alter their width fractionally to make them a bit bigger. Instead of 100 pixels, 120, and each of these LIs will get a fraction wider. So there we go. If you find something's not working, don't just leave it there and try something else, get rid of it, and it makes things a bit clearer. So there we go, it works okay. If I try and resize this, look, as I resize it, it will resize reasonably well. They're floats, so if I resize it too small, they go underneath each other like that. And to me that's okay, though it might mean you need to play around with borders on the LIs at the bottom instead of on the ULs. You get the general principle of really how easy it is to use a semantically appropriate bit of markup, i.e. an ordered list or an unordered list in this context, to do menus, both vertical and horizontal. This is the horizontal version. Okay, hope that was helpful. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.